Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening for those of you who are elsewhere. This is a program that's set up in partnership between the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles and the American Jewish University, and part of it is the reflections that we have in anticipation of the High Holy Days. I've been asked to talk, and I will do so for a while, on the question of why is this High Holy Days different from all others, and in that sense, to reflect on the nature of the times, the turbulent times, the difficult times, the painful times that we're living in. Let's begin with one statement about the High Holy Days that's terribly important, which is that one of the reasons Jews come back to the High Holy Days, and it's the largest and most widely attended synagogue services of the year, as we all know. We sometimes call it 3-day year Jews who walk into the synagogue on the Holy Days. It's because the theme of the High Holy Days is about ultimacy. It's about something that's ultimate, life and death, reflection on the totality of a year. It's also ironically and deeply and profoundly about hope. The hope theme is woven into the High Holy Days in very deep ways. It's woven in when we read on Rosh Hashanah of the birth of Isaac. When we read of today, the world is renewed. Today, the world is refreshed. It's about hope when we conclude Yom Kippur with the blowing of the shofar and the perennial chant next year in Jerusalem, in which the Jews, even in the deepest despair and the most profound exile, were able to imagine that next year it might be different. High Holy Days is also about self-examination. Where are we? Where have we gone? Where are we going? And it is a collective expression and collective confession of failure, which means also the possibility of being different in the future. Let me tell a Hasidic story, which may be quite appropriate for this time. A man is lost profoundly in the forest, and he comes to a clearing, and he notices another man in the forest. And they look at each other, and he says, "How do you get out of the forest?" And the man says, "I don't know how I get out of the forest. The one thing I do know is the path that I've taken is not the path to take." And the other man says, "The path that I have not taken, that I've taken, is also not the path to take." And consequently, they turn to each other and they say, "Let's take the path together," meaning that the holidays, in a very deep sense, are about where do we go in the world where we have not gone where we should have gone in the past. Let's talk now about where this High Holy Days is different, and where, in a very deep way, we're a different community in the world that is post-October 7th. I'm a historian, and consequently, I want to begin with a little bit of history and say essentially that the Jewish people made 3 decisions in the aftermath of 1945, decisions that have defined Jewish life for literally the past 79 years. The first decision is we continued to remain as Jews. And the second, and post-45, I'm saying, is in the aftermath of the Holocaust, which had totally transformed and shattered Jewish life throughout continental Europe and altered the matrix of Jewish existence. The first and most fundamental decision Jews made at that point was to remain as Jews. That was not necessarily a given, in the sense that there are other people who made a decision that they didn't want to, other Jews who made the decision they didn't want to link their future with the future of the Jewish people. Some of you know I've taught with Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State. I joke that I knew Madeleine Albright before she was Madeleine Albright, because we taught together at Georgetown before she became the UN ambassador, before she became the Secretary of State. And her family made the opposite decision in the aftermath of World War II. They made the decision to sever and to bury their ties with the Jewish people. And thus Madeleine grew up in the sense that in her family experience, being Jewish was the third rail of their experience. Don't ask, don't tell. Those of you who have been back to Poland, some of you have even had the opportunity to go back to Poland with me, understand that you have Jews who remained in Poland, which meant that they essentially buried their sense of being Jewish and decided that they would end that. But for me, the most incredible and the most unbelievable, and in one sense, the most heroic decision that Jews made in the aftermath of 1945 was to remain Jewish. Some of you have heard me tell the story. It's an irresistible one, that I met with a mole in Boston. The mole in Boston's name was Rabbi Arnold Weider. And Arnold Weider, because of the great affection that Boston holds for the New York Yankees, he had the nickname in Boston, affectionately nicknamed the Yankee Clipper. I asked him one day, Rabbi Weider, where did you learn to be a mole? And he said, I learned to be a mole in Bergen-Belsen, which is the displaced persons camp on the site just adjacent to the site of the concentration camp. And I scratched my head and I said, this is absolutely incredible. Jews who for 5 or 6 years, if they lowered their trousers, they were condemned to death, decided in the immediate aftermath of the Shoah to circumcise their newborn sons and to circumcise the boys who had not been circumcised during World War II because it was too dangerous to circumcise them. Those who had been hidden, those who had pretended to be non-Jews. And all of a sudden, they decided to make the indelible sign of the covenant on their sons, trusting in a world that didn't deserve of their trust, and sealing the fate of their sons that they would be known as Jews in the flesh, precisely with their belief in the future. So most Jews decided to remain as Jews, and then they made 2 very basic and very profound decisions. They decided, number one, that the future, what Yehuda Bauer called the Zionist option, the future of the Jewish people would be protected and defended by a Jewish army fighting for a Jewish state, an independent Jewish homeland. And Jews could there put an end to Jewish vulnerability, protect themselves and their families, and in a very deep way, build their future. The third decision they made was the very important decision that those of us who remained in the diaspora and who wanted to remain Jewish would link our faiths with democratic societies, classical liberal democratic societies that protected human rights, human dignity, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, democracies, and that among the rights that they protected were Jewish rights. And that's where the bulk of the movement of Jews after those who did not go to what was then Palestine after 1948 became Israel. Those who did not go to Palestine essentially headed for democratic societies gambling, believing that democracy would protect human rights, human dignity, Jewish rights, Jewish dignity, and the ability of Jews to lead as Jews. Those of you listening probably have already figured out that what makes this year different than all others is that the decisions that have guided the Jewish people for the last 79 years are dramatically less secure than they were when we commenced last year, 5784. And that is that we have seen Jewish vulnerability reach a new panacea in Israel, where essentially the events of October 7th shattered the notion, and October 7th, those of you who've heard me speak, understand wasn't a Holocaust, it was a pogrom, but a pogrom that occurred because a Jewish army and a Jewish police and a Jewish state was unable to protect its own Jewish community. And we have seen that the idea that Israel was going to be able to protect its citizens with an army, was open to question. And in fact, we are in the middle of fighting and refighting the war of 1948 and the question of Jewish independence. And instead of Israel being the solution to anti-Semitism, we see that it is a place of Jewish vulnerability, and is a place which can not only quench the fires of anti-Semitism, but also fuel the flames. Please don't imagine for a moment I'm assigning blame. My task is to look at the problem and, in that sense, to indicate it. Classical Zionism has had incredible achievements, yet some of its basic premises have been shown to be profoundly insecure. Classical Zionism promised independence, and the question of timing of that independence is an interesting one, which is that we became independent precisely as Jews became precisely as the world became interdependent. And that is, no nation occupies itself in independence apart from its relationship to the community of nations, to its neighbors, to its allies, to its trading partners, to the rest. And we live in an interdependent world. We were promised an end to Jewish vulnerability, and what we've achieved and what has been achieved is the possibility of dealing with Jewish vulnerability from a position of power. We had presumed a naive notion that if powerless invites victimization, the lesson of the Shoah, then power would put an end to victimization. And we've seen that power merely transforms victimization, transforms the ability that we have to deal with victimization. And that's a significant change, but it didn't end the problem. And we're seeing the venom of the past resurface in different ways and different manners. The third point is equally important, which is that classical Zionism presumed that Jews would become normal, a nation like any other nation. And what we've seen is Israel continues to remain an abnormal nation. Witness its centrality, witness the way in which nations respond to it, witness the fact that Jews are linked to it in a very different way than other people are linked to their classical homeland. And Jews continue to remain, in that sense, abnormal. Ironically, at the same time, cultural Zionism has had a tremendous success because we have seen generations of Israelis willing to live and to die to fight for the culture, the community that they have achieved, for the country that they have developed, the language that they have resurrected from the dead, the art, the music, the science, the technology, the dramatic sense of community, all of which define Israel. So let's think again. Decision number one was to remain Jews. Decision number two was to link ourselves with what we call the Zionist option, which has now shown itself to be less secure than it was. And decision number three was to link ourselves to democratic societies, and with the idea that Jews could be respected, accepted in a society that protects human rights, human dignity, and the like. And we have seen with the surge in anti-Semitism, we have seen that with not only the surge in anti-Semitism, but also the fragility of democracy and a whole range of anti-democratic forces that are coming to the fore, we have seen that that decision may not be quite as secure as we imagined it to be. And many of us are facing and feeling a question. Have we seen the peak of the golden age of American Jewry? And will our children enjoy, and our grandchildren enjoy, the same freedoms that our generation experienced, including the idea that we did not face discrimination, we did not face limitation, we had full cultural acceptance, full intellectual acceptance. And not only that, but we had the acceptance to be Jews in public as well as in private. If you describe the last 40 years of American Jewry, you could say that American Jewry broke the traditional agreement of the emancipation. The agreement of the emancipation was reflected in beautiful Hebrew. Be a Jew in your home and a man in the street, a person in the street, meaning if you enter into the public domain, you enter without your Jewishness. And we have the possibility, in a very deep and profound and wonderful way, of being Jewish in public and being Jewish in private in our homes, but also being Jewish in public in every way. By when you think of Abraham Joshua Heschel with a kippah marching with Martin Luther King and with Rabbi Eisendrath carrying a Torah, marching for human rights and human dignity, you have the sense of that. When you think of, and I can give you an example of Harvard, which is the site of anti-Semitism. I can give you the example. In 1924, a man who later became the greatest Jewish scholar of his generation, Harry Austin Wilson, wrote in a Jewish journal at Harvard, "Some are born blind, some are born lame, some are born Jewish." As late as the 1950s, Jews at Harvard felt that they didn't want to be too public as Jews. Yitz Greenberg, Rabbi Irving Greenberg, tells the story that when he was at Harvard, he was an Orthodox rabbi. He didn't wear a kippah, so he wore a hat. And when he walked inside a building to take a class, he took off his hat, which was the behavior of his fellow Orthodox Jewish men. Came back 20 years later, and all of a sudden he saw young men and their mini-skirted girlfriends walking arm in arm. The young men had the kippah on their head, and he said he didn't envy them, the mini-skirted girlfriends, but what he did envy them deeply and profoundly was the capacity to wear a kippah, to be a Jew in public. And indeed, when Harvard Hillel moved from to its new home The procession was led by a man who was provost of Harvard, Henry Wissowski. Henry Wissowski was the first Jew to turn down the presidency of Yale to stay at Harvard as provost. And when he turned down the presidency of Yale, his wife said to him, how can you turn down the presidency of Yale? You'd be the first Jewish president of Yale. And he turned to her and he said, you don't understand. Being a Jewish president of Yale is now inevitable. I want to be the first Jew to turn down the presidency of Yale. And ironically, there have been multiple Jews who have been presidents of Yale, including a descendant of the great family of Soloveitchik, who's just departed as president. And the new president of Yale is the granddaughter of a very distinguished American rabbi, Everett Gendler. And she came to the position saying not only that she was Jewish, but saying the Z word, that she was a Zionist. Wissowski said as they dedicated the new Hillel, Jews have moved from the periphery of Harvard to the center, and it's here where we want to remain, where we intend to remain. And that again, we're seeing the opposite trend taking place, both in terms of the numbers of Jews who attend, the percentage of Jews who attend, and also the degree to which they feel at home in their new environment. So we are feeling challenged, and we are coming together as Jews in an uneasy climate to face the ultimate question. The ultimate questions, the question that is framed most deeply: who shall live and who shall die? Who shall be created and who shall come to an end? Who by water, who by fire, who by water? And the issue of where do we go and what do we do? And where do we transform ourselves as we come into the future? That, in a very profound way, is a radical change from a secure, confident Jewish community to an anxious Jewish community that is facing significant questions regarding its future here, regarding its future in Israel. I'm working with a colleague of mine, Rick Rickman, on a collecting rabbis' sermons this year having to deal with Israel. We want to collect all the sermons that rabbis give, from Orthodox, conservative, Reform, ultra-Orthodox, independent, Reconstructionist synagogues, to see how rabbis are going to deal with the enormous tension of an anxious congregation facing their days of ultimacy, the high holy days. And what instructions do we give Jews how to live? And what instructions do we give Jews on how to face the future? We're going to collect all of them, create them as an archive, because there's important to understand how rabbis grapple and how congregants grapple with these issues in times of crisis. And we're hoping to do that for future historians. We're hoping also to be able to publish the best of them, so that we can get an instant, as it were, sense of where the Jews are. Let me talk about anti-Semitism for a very brief moment, and I'll summarize in a very basic way what we have to say about anti-Semitism, and talk about what messages I think I want to, were I to lead a congregation this year, God help that congregation, but what messages I think I want you to take away from the High Holy Days, and then we'll take questions. Anti-Semitism differs as to its form, as to its source. It differs as to its goal. It differs as to its priority. And it differs as to the stability of society. The source of anti-Semitism can be religious, it can be political, it can be social, it can be cultural, it can be what we use in Nazi terms, racial. It can be economic. That's the question of source. The goal of anti-Semitism differs by its source. If it's religious anti-Semitism, the goal is conversion. If it's political anti-Semitism, it's the diminishment of Jewish political power. You've heard the words, the Jews will not replace us. If it's economic anti-Semitism, that can result in boycott, that can result in economic obstacles we won't do business with, and the like. If it's cultural anti-Semitism, it is the idea that we want to remove Jews and the Jewish element from our culture. Those of you who know classical music know Richard Wagner's writing on the Jews and Jewish music. You understand the function of degenerate art in Nazi Germany. You also see the way in which if Jews are made uncomfortable in the elite universities of the United States, that's a cultural anti-Semitism that leads to a sense of ostracism. We don't want you as a full part and equal participant with all the agitation that makes in our culture. Anti-Semitism can be social anti-Semitism. Those of you, or those of us who live in Los Angeles, remember the famous lines of line of Groucho Marx. I would never want to belong to a club that would have me as a member. Social anti-Semitism, those of you who go to the, and I'm thinking of this because I was just invited to speak at the exhibition in the Motion Picture Academy, the exhibition on Jewish moguls who established Hollywood. You'll be interested to see that one of the things that they look at is as they established Hollywood and became men, and in those days it was almost all men of power and prestige, they not only show the studios they founded, but they show Hillcrest Country Club, they show Wilshire Boulevard Synagogue and Temple Israel of Hollywood. Some of you who have had medical procedures understand that part of the social anti-Semitism led to Cedars-Sinai because Jewish doctors could not find practices and could not find privileges in hospitals, and consequently Jews established their own hospitals because Jews were not admitted into Los Angeles Country Club. They established their own country club. Nazi anti-Semitism was racial, and with all respect to Whoopi Goldberg, the essence of it being racial was it was based on the religion of people's grandparents. It was a matter of blood, not a matter of belief, and that's the ultimate definition of racial and racism. Anti-Semitism also differs as to the priority. One of the reasons Jews have been secure in the United States of America since our arrival here has been we've never been the number one priority for the anti-Semite. And consequently, we all could take a list of a whole range of other people who are higher on the list with regard to anti-Semitism, with regard to hatred. And Jews become third place, fourth place, fifth place, sixth place. And consequently, our security derives from the fact that others are ahead of us in line. The irony is that where you have DEI taking root, DEI addresses the groups that have been marginalized ahead of the Jews. And because it does not include the Jews, we end up in an interesting situation where Jews become the first priority or a higher priority. And consequently, we experience the tremendous sense of anti-Semitism. final element I said is that anti-Semitism differs also with regard to the stability of society. The more stable a society is, the more secure its Jewish community. And the opposite is also the case, that if the Jews are not, the less stable a society is, the more insecure the Jewish community. And Jews can be regarded as canary in the mine, which is a canary is put in the mine because if there's lack of oxygen, the canary will feel it first before it's lethal for the miners. And if you look at the way in which anti-Semitism behaves, that essentially is a warning signal of the deep and profound instability of a society. We have new tools of anti-Semitism. The first tool of anti-Semitism is that we've never had before is the internet. And that is that you have the capacity in your hands with this phone. I have capacity to broadcast nationwide, worldwide, with no additional expenses. And the second thing that we have in this is we also have the notion of social groups. That means that you can no longer marginalize the anti-Semite or put them off to the edges and ostracize the anti-Semite, because there are groups of haters who gather, who find mutual support for each other. And that mutual support for each other becomes enormously significant. And it also means that they are learning from each other, and they're being radicalized online, and they have mutual support societies taking place in the social network systems. And those are brand new tools. Jews, how do we live in this new reality? Let me offer three principles. Number one, we're living in a new reality. Let's recognize it. Our generation had understood that it was easy to be a Jew. My grandparents used to say, "Too schwer zu sein a Yid." It's difficult to be a Jew. And I think our children and grandchildren may say it's difficult or more difficult to be a Jew. And consequently, they have to develop two things that are terribly important. The first is resilience, and that is the ability to deal with and to grapple with and to struggle with and to wrestle with living in a world of such insecurity and a certain toughness. I use an example of resilience from a baseball documentary that Ken Burns did. Oh, it's going to be 30 years ago. And Ken Burns did a baseball documentary, and I remember the baseball documentary succinctly because I saw all 9 parts of the baseball documentary when I had the flu, so I think I saw it, and I would doze off in the middle of every part. I think I saw it 17 or 18 or 20 times before I completed it, but there was a scene there in which a black ball player who was so anxious to play in the major leagues tried to rip off his skin. And he was so desperate to forget his, to get rid of his handicap that he tried to rip off his skin. And then Kurt Flood, who broke the baseball reserve clause, came in and said, "I never objected to having a black skin. I always wish I had a thicker one." And that's a certain toughness, a certain resilience that is required. The second is that we have to understand the majesty, the mystery, the profundity the sanctity, the sacredness, the holiness of not how to suffer as a Jew, but how to live as a Jew. What is it about this enterprise that defines us in a very real way? What is it about it that makes us willing to accept responsibility for the Jewish future? And I think that we all have to think in our own lives, what is it in our capacity? What is it that this offers to us? What does it give us? And what do we give to it that makes pursuing this journey of remaining and enhancing and deepening our sense of Jewishness such a very important part and such an essential part of life? What do we offer the world? What does it offer ourselves? What is it that makes this journey so terribly important? The other thing that we have to reflect upon is very deeply that we have every difficulty is a challenge and an opportunity. And we have to face that as well. I wish we had stronger leadership in pivotal places in our community. I wish we had more visionary leadership. But I think that, and I don't want to get into the political sphere, but I deeply and profoundly hope that we could get greater leadership in the political sphere. And we have to discover essentially what we have to offer and what we can collectively do. We have an interesting model of this taking place in Israel. There's one piece of good news from all the travail that we've seen. And I've been to Israel several times this year, and it's the one conclusion I came away with, which is that the people of Israel are greater than its leadership. And the people of Israel have been risen to the occasion in all sorts of ways. And I want us to say that the Jews of America have risen to this occasion, have essentially confronted the challenge and the like. One final word, which is the new year offers an opportunity, and it offers a closing of the books and opening of books. We have a metaphor of the sealing of the books. And there's a Hebrew phrase, tichle shana, which may be a blessing. Tichle shana v'kilotah, tavo shana u'brachata. Yet a year and its curses end, and a new year and its blessings begin. And this has certainly been, 5784 has certainly been what the late Queen Elizabeth would have recited as an annus horribilis, a terrible year. And that means that we have to usher in a different year in 5785. Let me take some questions, see if we go from there and where we go. Somebody's asking, how much do you feel that the actions of a certain section of the Jewish community have contributed to the current surge in anti-Jewish, anti-Semitism, Israelism by giving cover to the anti-Jewish Palestinian activities? Look, I think that we have I can't, Richard, I can't quantify it. I can't quantify it, but I can say the following, that we have to engage a whole segment of the Jewish community because their experience, we have multiple elements of commitment to Israel. And in one sense, that commitment to Israel is shaped in certain respects by war, shaped by experience. Um, Let me play historian for a moment and put it in the following way. My parents' generation and my parents were in their 30s when Israel was formed, saw the creation of Israel as such an incredible blessing, and my parents were American and the like, but they saw the creation of Israel in the aftermath of the Holocaust as such an incredible blessing and such an incredible miracle that it was shaped by that and by that sense of amazement that took place. I was a generation that was shaped by the euphoria of 1967, when every Jew felt that they were 6'5" and could take on the entire world. And then the humility that was developed in the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. And also the sense of the 82 war and the 67 and 73 war ushered in what Jonathan Lucher, a great sociologist of Judaism, late Jonathan Lucher, called sacred survival. What it meant to be a Jew in the second third of the 20th century was that we were committed to remembering the Holocaust and supporting Israel and to surviving as Jews. And that ended for some in 82 with Israel's war of choice in Lebanon. It ended for others in 87, which raised the question, the first Intifada, which raised the question of, well, is the 67 war a total and complete victory, or is it something else? And has Israel now become a cruel and occupying power? It ended for some in 93 with the Oslo Accords, which transformed the narrative and offered the idea that the land of Israel might be compromised. It ended for some in 2000 with Intifada 2. For some, it never ended. The generation of young people today is a generation that has only known the Israel of Benjamin Netanyahu, and consequently, they need a different sort of outlook and education regarding Israel in order to be brought along. And yes, certain Jews are running cover. Certain Jews are running cover and are giving cover for anti-Semitism. We have to see, when is it anti-Semitism and what is the difference between that and legitimate opposition to the state of Israel. Some of you have heard a very basic thing that I want to say, which is that there are three criteria of that Natan Sharansky has said, that is the difference between legitimate criticism of the government of Israel. And I think the government of Israel has every reason to be criticized. It has failed its population at its basic element of securing them and providing for them. And consequently, there is legitimate criticism. And when is that anti-Semitism? Sharansky said it's 3Ds. Double standards, delegitimation, and demonization. If you judge Israel by one standard, the rest of the world by another, you're going close to anti-Semitism. If you say, for example, that Israel lives in territories that were occupied by a native population that was displaced, that was true of the United States, that was true of Canada, that was true of Mexico, that's true of Australia. It's true of about 27 different countries in the world who live on land displacing an original population. Consequently, if Israel has no right to exist, then we have no right to exist in the United States and the like, and Canada does not. What we find is in Canada and in Australia, in particular, they recognize that they are on the native land and they try very deeply to respect the native culture with all its limitations. And I don't have to get into the mixed Canadian record, including the abduction of kids and their kidnapping and the like. So you have all of that taking place. But the last is that Israel is demonic, and that the source, not only that it makes mistake, but it's the source of all evil, and it's by nature evil, and that becomes the equivalent of the way in which Jews were accused of blood libels, Jews were accused of poisoning the wells. It's a recycling of traditional uh, uh, anti-Semitism, and it's moving in a different way. So let's begin by, again, three standards: double standards, delegitimation, demonization. Steve makes comment, my mother, Auschwitz survivor, would say, out of bad comes good, which reflects comments. And I think what we have to say is different. We've been dealt the hands of lemons, and we have to understand how to make lemonade. And out of bad comes good only if we find a way of making it good. I don't want to have a guarantee. In that sense, I'm more of a skeptic than a great believer. But I think that these are challenges, these difficulties are challenges which become an opportunity, and we can have good come out of the bad that we're experiencing. Steve also says, recently attended a Nova Festival and increased spirit that October 7th was more than a pogrom. It was a well-planned, full military assault. Absolutely. And Steve, I came away from the Nova exhibition, and I strongly recommend that all of you attend the Nova exhibition while it's in town. I came away from the Nova exhibition angry at how long it took for the Israeli Army, Air Force, and military, as well as its police force, to respond. There was a profound and deep failure. Was a profound and deep failure. And one of the things, if we get into a post-war world, that needs to happen is a commission that will examine all of the elements that took place and will come to conclusions. Clearly, deep and profound and basic mistakes were made. And clearly, the Israelis themselves, and I say this as one who's been in Israel several times since the war, the Israelis themselves are wondering, what is our strategy? And that is that they see a government that has been creative tactically without ever articulating a strategy. And the question becomes, what is its strategy, and what does it want to ultimately achieve? Pauline has asked a question: can Israel be a true democracy and still be a Jewish state? The answer to that is yes and yes, but not easily. And that is that the question becomes, to remain a true democracy, Israel has to assume democratic values. And to remain a Jewish state, they have to define what Jewish values are applicable to statehood and how to transform them. Let me answer that many years ago, I had a conversation with one conversation with the late Rabbi Meir Kahana. And I said, you're no danger in America. In America, as you assert Jewish rights to the maximum, if you go too far, the society and the government will tell you you've gone too far, and they'll stop you. Your real danger is in Israel, where essentially the nature of a democracy is not how it protects the rights of the majority, but how it protects the rights of the minority. And if you assert Jewish rights, Jewish rights, Jewish rights, Jewish rights, there is nobody there and no one there who's going to stop you. But democracy itself means, in essence, the respect and the protection of minority rights, not majority rights. And consequently, I don't think that entire segments of Israeli political leadership understand that. And that's part of the tremendous uh, tensions that you have at the core of Israeli society. Honey has asked a question, and I always find her questions. She's a long time and wonderful friend. Can I explain the impact of DEI prioritizing Jews as object of hatred and marginalization? Very simply, that if you take, and if I asked everybody to write a list of who are the groups that are higher priority for hatred in our society, and if you want me, I will list groups that would normally come in on that. And let's say traditionally in America, that would include Blacks, that would include Hispanics, that would include gays, that would include transgender people, that would include immigrants, especially newer immigrants, because all of us in America are immigrants. Whole range of people who are higher priority on the scale in terms of persecution and victimization. What results is that Jews who are not included in this group end up becoming the people who are most visible for hatred and marginalization. And in one sense, we're saying, congratulations, Jews, you are white, you are privileged, and you are oppressors. And not only that, but we're asking essentially, and we just saw this in a legal case at UCLA, you're asking essentially what is the identity and whether the identity is acceptable before you're admitted onto certain segments of the campus or certain buildings and the like. And that was the great rebuke that was given in the courts and the like. I've been asked, what are your thoughts of safety of Western European Jewish communities in their situation, a precedent for what can happen in the United States? There's a very important element that we have to focus on, which is, and I didn't have an opportunity to talk because I didn't really want to talk because I don't think Jews are ready to quite pay attention to this during the High Holy Days. But there are elements of good news taking place as well. Easy example is religious anti-Semitism is on the decline. Best example is Roman Catholic Church, which over 3 generations eliminated the accusation that Jews are responsible for the murder of, for the crucifixion of Christ. Sin, if Christ died for our sins, then sin is responsible, which is the statement of Vatican II and Nostra Aetate, and all of the transformation of Roman Catholic leadership then came in. Under John Paul II, it recognized the state of Israel. It also declared that anti-Semitism is anti-Christian. And under the most recent Pope Francis, the Roman Catholic Church eliminated its mission to the Jews. So if you look at that in terms of thousands of years in history, what was the source of anti-Semitism? That's dramatic good news. The other good news is that governments have seen that anti-Semitism is a fundamental challenge to democracy, and consequently, they have put the resources of the country behind supporting its Jewish community. And consequently, we have to make sure that that continues. Best example in the United States was when the Pittsburgh 11 were killed. What happened? The governor showed up, the mayor showed up, the district attorney showed up, the police chief showed up. Pittsburgh Steelers and Pittsburgh Penguins, the football and the hockey team, put on what? Put on Jewish stars. And essentially, Mrs. Rogers, because Squirrel Hill was Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, she came out to demonstrate this is not what we want. We don't want hatred here. When Charlie Hebdo took place in France and the attack on Hyper Cacher, the prime minister of all the European countries came out against anti-Semitism, something radical and dramatic that took place. Never before in the history had you had such a parade of leadership against anti-Semitism, not necessarily because they love Jews, but because they love democracy and saw the attack on Jews as a substantive attack on the democracy they want to achieve. Best example of that was in Germany. Angela Merkel was pro-Israel and pro-Jewish deeply because the last thing she wanted, she was viciously and virulently anti-Nazi, and she felt the last thing she wanted for Germany was to touch upon, to come close to its Nazi past, and consequently the notion of leadership that is coming from that extreme in Germany became antithetical and difficult and painful for her, as it is painful today. So I think that we have to be careful that and the like. And again, we also sometimes we saw this, by the way, in we have to appeal for the protection of our government, so that we don't end up in a situation that we had at either Yisrael, where the Los Angeles Police Department was unprepared to defend the ability of Jews to gather in their synagogue. And we have to be careful of that with regard to the High Holy Days. And again, you can tell a synagogue in Europe by the armed services around it. And I think we can begin to think of that as a tremendous drain on resources that we never had to come before. Let me say that it's not time to weigh in, and I deliberately avoided both politics in Israel and politics in the United States, not because I don't have political opinions, but because I think that as we come to the edge of the High Holy Days, I want to see if there are things that can unite Jews instead of dividing Jews again and again. Let me come back to our final quote. And I have to tell you a story that I have two grandnephews who are in the Israeli army and the like, and I have friends whose sons and grandsons serve in the Israeli army. And I have a blessing for them that I utter when they go off to their life. I say, may your service be boring. I'm not talking about High Holy Day services, by the way. May you be bored silly in the army. And I think that I would hope profoundly and deeply that we have a year in which, and the blessing I gave before is Tichle shana v'kiloteha. Let a year and its curses end. Let a year and its blessings begin. And let me remind us and conclude with this. I want you to think of an image. What is the notes of the shofar? The tkiya is a whole note. Shvarim is when it's broken. Right? Shvarim comes from the word sheva, broken. Trua is an urgent call. It becomes 1 to 3 to 9. But how do we always end the blast of the shofar? We end the blast of the shofar now with a note that is whole and enduring. And may that be our blessing for the new year. Thank you very much for joining us. We thank Federation and AJU for co-sponsoring this event. May the year and its blessings and its curses end, and the new year and its blessings come. The Jewish people must endure. Thank you.